All right, all right. Good evening, everybody. We're gonna let folks trickle in for about 30 more seconds or so. Happy you're all here tonight. Thanks for accommodating the change from last night to tonight. I appreciate that. Um, got got your main man, Ronnie McKnight, MC in the house.
Hi everyone. It's Jed, it's not common usually when we do these sorts of like we don't have the same tools that you guys have, and so usually we can see the other faces in the room. And so it's odd for me just to be talking and staring at you.
Just looking at me. Well, it's not a bad look.
Yeah,
But I think there's like a webinar or there's like a meet. There's like different ways to frame it. And let me turn off my on and off video. My camera kind of gets a little finicky if I move too much back and forth. But yeah, I think that it's like a meeting versus a webinar. And
yeah.
then the meeting will have everyone's face. The webinar will just be us talking to each other.
It'll be nice
We
just
could,
talking with you.
it is excellent talking to you, no, for sure. And we're going to have like a chance for Q&A. That the whole point is to make sure we answer all the questions. So there'll be
Cool.
hopefully a very lively Q&A towards the end. Okay. Well, 7:01. Do you want to
Yeah, let's go
jump
ahead and
in?
start.
Cool.
And everyone, I'm not going to be your presenter tonight. I just wanted to start by saying good evening to everyone. And if you don't know me, I'm Ronnie McKnight. I'm one of the college counselors at Paideia. And before I turn the program back over to Jed, I just wanted to thank you, the audience, for joining us tonight. And more importantly, I wanted to just give a special thanks to Jed and his team for providing this session for us at Paideia. You may be familiar with Jed's surname. He's the founder and president of Applerouth Tutoring Services. And even if this is your first child going through this process, you may recognize Applerouth because literally generations of Paideia students have used his organization services as they've prepped for standardized testing like the SAT and ACT. Um, for many years, Jed has also been nice enough to host these sorts of events for us, helping students and families better understand kind of the process and standardized testing as far as the options and distinctions and trends. Jed is a very respected professional in his field, and we're very grateful for him sharing his time and knowledge with us tonight. And again, just a huge thank you for doing this, not only to Jed, but also to his team members who made this kind of behind the scenes, who made this evening possible. And on that note, I'll turn it back over to Jed.
Thank you, Ronnie. I appreciate that very much. And yes, I think my first Paideia student was 2002. And I think my first presentation at Paideia with John was 2005. So it's been
Back when we used to actually meet in person
there was a
pre-Zoom.
lot of yes, there was no Zoom back in '05. A lot of in-person meetings. So I've always enjoyed the Paideia community and families and students and the faculty. So I'm a big fan of the school, the philosophy, everything I'll do over there. So tonight we're going to be talking about testing, all things testing, because testing, as you probably know, is making something of a comeback after a very interesting time during the pandemic when everything was frozen and turned off. Before we jump in, we're going to do a quick 2-question poll. We can tee this thing up. It's literally, are you a parent? And you're probably all parents for this one. And then, are you a parent of a student in a certain grade? And then that's it. That's a very fast poll. And there'll be one at the very, very end. One thing also, we are recording this. And so we'll be sending a durable link after this in a day or so, which you can watch again. You can share with the spouse. And then there's some folks who can't be here tonight, and we'll have the link. They can watch it at their convenience later on. All right. So without further ado, let me go ahead and jump in, and I will begin to share my screen. All right. There we go. So testing. Let's jump right in. Here we go. Okay. Everyone knows that the world we live in now is predominantly a test optional world. Okay, that's a change that I've been in the space for 25 years. And when I started, test optional was a sliver of schools, very small handful. And then when you had like Wake Forest went optional like 08, 09, like it was a big news whenever a single school went test optional because the lion's share of schools were test required. Pandemic hit and the entire country became test optional because testing wasn't available. And that was a total sea change. And currently 1,900 schools in the U.S. are test optional. So that is still the dominant, and we're never going back to the everything test required for a lot of reasons. There's things happening in education with the demographic cliff. There are fewer and fewer students in this cohort of kids. Today's kindergarten class is a lot smaller than the one graduating, and that's already in the pipeline. It's already baked in. So we're going to have fewer kids going forward for the next 15, 20 years or so. So we have fewer kids. We're going to have more and more schools making it easier to get into college, not harder. And they're going to be removing barriers, especially some of the mid-level, lower-level schools. So I can't see a lot of schools going back to test required, but a small handful of schools have returned to testing. It so happens that many of these schools are the ones your kids are going to want to attend. But there are, again, there are many, many kids who, my kids, I've heard it so many times, my kid has amazing grades, amazing rigor, everything's flawless, but the test scores really aren't there. And even if with a ton of work, we're not going to get anywhere near their middle 50 percentile range. And there are still many, many, many schools, and there's a pathway for those kids too. But we'll talk about the whole world, how it looks with the different assessments with the SAT, the ACT. There have been some changes over the past couple of years. Things are finally settling out again. We're having a new normal, but there's definitely been a lot of flux since the past couple of years. So that being said, tests, the world we live in is predominantly test optional, but it's not test blind. And that's something to be mindful of, that even in schools, and there are many of them, there where test scores are not required, they can still have a very meaningful impact on admissions. And that's something where it's, I don't want everyone to confuse or conflate the term test optional and test blind. They're very different things, because there are many things that are optional but still impactful. So part of it, looking at the grid, where are we? What's happened? The pandemic happened, and you saw testing really plummeted the year after. But the SAT has been making a nice climb. We're almost back to the pre-pandemic numbers. About 2 million kids this year. This will be higher. We'll definitely crest past 2 million this year for the SAT. It's gaining popularity, and it's a really short test now. 2 hours and a slight change, and that is going to make it very easy to administer during the school day. So we're already about 2/3 of the kids taking it during the school day, and that's going to keep continuing. So we're going to have a lot more adoption of the SAT. And now we have a shortened ACT, which was just released in the paper version in September. Some of your kids may have taken it. So we have a brand new test, brand new format. It was digital last April, but now it's on every format, paper, digital, and I'll talk about that. But just part of the change, the SAT has been leading. They went digital adaptive. They're the dominant test. The ACT was really struggling to get traction after the pandemic, and they've had changes in ownership. There's a new direction. And after what they saw happening over at the College Board, they decided to also redesign their test, which was just released in September. So there's, things are moving, and I've been watching this duopoly, this back and forth competition for 20 some plus years, and it's interesting how they imitate each other. And there's been a lot more confluence though in terms of the content they assess. These tests are very similar, even though there are differences in format and timing. The SAT and the ACT have never been more similar. And so when I started back in 2001, they were very different tests. One was really aptitude. The SAT was really tied to its IQ roots, and a lot of abstract thinking, abstract reasoning, analogies, a lot of vocabulary, and all that's gone. And now it really is a test of reading and grammar and math. And the ACT also, now that they're making science optional, it looks a lot more now like the SAT. So these tests are really converging in many ways, though there are some differences. So there are schools on this list. Some of them are some of the best schools in the country that now require testing. And I'll talk about why that happened and some of the research which led to that. But Princeton just joined in the past month, and there are more coming, and there are going to be more coming after this admission cycle. I think we're probably done for the current cycle, October, November, December, but there'll be more coming in January, February. There's going to be a trickle of schools, probably forever, that are going to be jumping back in as they finish their experiments with the pandemic and they go back to test required. But it's going to be a small number, but it will be some of the schools that are the most competitive schools in the country. So that's just part of the dynamic that we're in. Additionally, the flagship state schools, we're seeing, because of economics, they're driving the flagship schools to become so selective, like Georgia Tech, and there's so many more kids are applying now from out of state for a lot of reasons, but predominantly it's economics. These are still really good deals. And there are amazing deals if you're in state, like with the Florida schools, with their bright futures, phenomenal deals if you have good grades, good test scores. All the Georgia Tech and with the Hope and the Zell, incredible deals, the best in the world. And many of the Texas in-state, UT, it's an incredible school. And of so many of these schools, they're getting so many applications, like UNC Chapel Hill, Michigan, Virginia. Their admit rates out of state are like Ivies. And so because of that, with this huge pool coming in, a very small number of seats, many of them are going test required. So I'm expecting more schools, and more schools in the South, especially. The South really is having a return. And I'm waiting. Auburn just flipped back, test required. I'm waiting on Alabama, and then Mississippi, other schools, Tennessee, they're all, they're in. So expect more of this, more flagship states, more private schools that are very selective, and they could be coming back within the next few months. There's been a drip over the past year. And here's the calendar of the big schools. Georgia went first in terms of the states. And Florida never went with Kemp and all that. Florida kept testing throughout because Bright Futures, their scholarships are so tied to testing that they never went test optional, even during the pandemic. And then Georgetown jumped right back in. MIT came back in. And their rationale is interesting, is that we can't tell who will do well at MIT without testing. That we need that good math score to make sure kids don't fail out or transfer out. And then Tennessee, Purdue, Dartmouth. Then there was a huge bump that happened with Dartmouth, Yale, Brown, Harvard, Caltech, Cornell. And that was all within a couple months. That was last year. And that was because of a study that took place out of Harvard with an economist named Raj Chetty, who eventually will get the Nobel. He's a genius with big data, huge data sets, looking at 1.4 million applications for the Ivies Plus, Chicago, MIT, Duke, and Stanford. And now we're seeing almost all those schools are now test required because of that research, which showed that for those schools that are super selective, test scores are the best predictors of performance at those super high schools, even more than high school grades. And that's when, bam, Dartmouth went right back, and then everyone followed within weeks, Yale and Brown and Harvard and so forth. And we're seeing more of these engineering schools. Carnegie Mellon, they just jumped back in the mix. I was waiting on them. A lot of the engineering programs are now test required, and there are more coming. Caltech went from test blind to test required, which is very interesting. And even schools like Worcester Polytechnic, they were test blind, now they're optional. Because all these engineering programs are realizing, oh, that math score really matters. And if kids can't do math on the SAT, once they hit differential equations and advanced calculus, they're going to be in trouble. So that math score helps protect. That was MIT's rationale. If you can't get a decent math score in the sevens, you're probably not going to do well on our advanced math at MIT. So that's it. Now, one of the things you can look for when you're trying to figure out who might switch, you look at the last. There's something called the common data set. And it's any school in the country, you can type it in, you can type in, UChicago common data set and for the last year, and it'll tell you exactly how many kids who are currently enrolled in the freshman class sent test scores. And if that number is over 70%, or around 70%, there's a good chance that school is going back test required. And it shows you something about the philosophy in the admissions office. Because there are schools that are selective where this number is much, much lower. Who really are truly test optional. But when you see a number where the number of kids, 80% of kids sent test scores, this admissions office probably likes testing. And they're admitting a class with that in mind. And so even if that school is optional, my thought is they're putting a little bit more weight on the assessments. If they're letting in such a majority of kids with testing and turning away those who are lacking testing. And so, on this list, Penn and Princeton, now they're both back. Chicago could flip back in a minute. Same thing with UNC. Now the regent said they're allowed to go on a school-by-school basis. So I'm waiting for Chapel Hill to go back test required, just because it's getting so ridiculous, like 8% admit rate out of state. It's like, the old, when I applied to Penn, the admit rate was like 30%. Now these state schools are single digits. So it's just showing you the world that we live in now. It's very, very different. And the flagships, Virginia, UNC, Michigan, they're incredibly selective out of state. But again, Emory could flip back at any day. I'm kind of waiting for them to, but again, UVA, we'll see what's coming next. And the rationale, so MIT, the dean, Stuart Schmel, came in first. Our research says without test scores, we can't tell who will do well. Then same thing at Brown, test scores are a better predictor. Jeremiah Quinlan at Yale said test scores are the best predictor of grades at Yale. Same thing at Dartmouth, high school GPA explains less than testing does by itself when they're running the regression analysis. Because again, this is a very elite bunch of schools and test scores really predict. I'll show you the graph. And then at Texas, they announced their data was very, very compelling, very surprising for a state school. That mid-year, freshman year, they said the kids who sent test scores, and they were almost a full grade point higher. So if the average for kids with test scores was a 3.5, the average of non-submitters was a 2.66. So it's like, holy cow, and they were much more likely to be on probation. So it's like after that, UT said test required, then Ohio State, and I expect more schools because Texas isn't that exceptional. And so if that was true for them, it's true for other schools who are selective too. And again, UT is a very selective state school. So there are some that are much less selective, but schools who are pretty tough to get into, they may follow the guidance of Texas. So this is the graph that led to pretty much everything from Dartmouth. The head of Dartmouth, Sean Baylock, she's a researcher I've been following with my ed psychology background for 20 years. She's brilliant, and she's a data person. And this data came out, and she's like, we're going to follow the data. And the data shows on the left side, you have, again, these 1.4 million applications looking at as the SAT score increased from 1200 to a perfect score. You see the GPA in these Ivy Plus schools just kept going up. So testing was a good predictor. Kids with a 1200 ended up with a 3.2 GPA at these elite schools, the Ivy Plus 4. Those with 16 had a 3.7 roughly. So as a nice showing you test scores really make a difference at these schools. But look at GPA, that kids with a 3.1 in high school are getting a 3.45 and these Ivy Plus, and those kids who have a 4.0 are getting only a 3.55. So it's like, wow, high school GPA is really not that good of a predictor. Test scores are, and then boom, all these schools began dropping. And so Duke has not, they might not, but Chicago waiting on them, but almost everyone else has jumped back in with test scores being. So this is the data that led to that decision. And then UT Austin, again, same thing. Kids with test scores are just doing better. Kids with test scores are less likely to be on probation, and that's it. So it's like test scores, again, are protecting the kids to make sure they have the chops, because there's been a lot of grade inflation in America over the past 20, 30 years. And there's a lot of compression. A lot of kids have really, a lot of A's aren't as special as they were. And especially during the pandemic, grading cultures got a little bit looser. And we're seeing interesting things that looking at standardized test scores, they're down on pretty much every metric in terms of the SAT, in terms of the ACT. Oh, 1 second. I have a 3-year-old coming into the room. Turn your TV. Wow. Want to see my little 3-year-old?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mom's supposed to be watching my kids. Hello. Say hi to everybody. Hello, everybody. All right, guys. All right, Mom, can you help him? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, guys. All right. I will see you later. Very good. All right. So back to, yes, testing and little children. John Ladding. Ronnie knows John. Down the street over at Emory. I saw him over at NACAC. We're doing a class on calculus and what happens with kids after AP Calc when they go to college. And there were some strong critiques in terms of, are kids really ready after calculus for what comes next? For the head of Caltech was very critical. But anyhow, John was in the audience talking to John. And one of the comments he made was that we are not as trusting, frankly, of GPA these days. Grades are definitely inflated and not as connected to the true class performance as they used to be. They're going to be looking more closely at external assessments. And that's going to be the APs, that's going to be the SATs and ACTs. So they are looking. So schools that are optional, they're still looking at testing. And even the schools like, if you apply to the UCs, UCLA, UC Irvine, Davis, they're test blind for the SAT, ACT. They are certainly not test blind for the APs and the IBs. They look very closely at those. Because again, they have so many kids applying with these superlative GPAs, they need some way to differentiate. And that's where something standardized really helps them. So if you're applying to, UC Berkeley, you definitely need good scores on the APs. That really helps the admissions. They're not required, but they are impactful. All right, so testing has influenced decisions even at schools that are optional. Strong scores demonstrate a level of readiness, and especially for STEM majors. That's something that math score is really fundamental. If you're looking at being, pre-business with all, with calculus for finance and, derivatives, you're looking at, It's more like engineering and math majors and comp sci and an AI major. That math is really important. Even though this math is not college level math, if you're struggling with this math, you're probably going to struggle some with the math in college. And that's what they found. That was all the research at MIT. And in a similar fashion, Harvey Mudd, that out in California, a very strong engineering program, they used to put a ton of weight on this thing called the Math 2 that was pre-cal. And like, if you can't get a 650 on this test, again, it's well below the math that we use here in college, you're gonna struggle at Harvey Mudd. And I'm waiting see if they go back, test required to that whole group out in California. So strong test scores also can affect merit-based aid. That's something, yeah, obviously, you know about the Zell, you know about the Hope Scholarship, and there are other schools. One example I always give is Alabama. My niece applied to Bama. She had a 1390 on the SAT, and that puts her in the UA Scholar bracket. So tuition, she lives in Richmond, Virginia. Tuition out of state is normally 34 grand, but if you get that 3.5 GPA, which she obviously had, and a 1390, then suddenly your tuition goes from $33,000 a year down to around seven and change, right? Eight grand a year. So it's a big difference. You're going to save $96,000. In Alabama, they're drawing kids from all over the country. It's 40+% out of state now, and they're pulling kids like kids get into Dartmouth and Bama, and they get a full ride, and they go to Bama. It's like because they're gonna try to go to Dartmouth for grad school, but all the merit money is really undergrad. That's where the merit money is at its finest. So this thing is real. Interestingly enough, with her 1390, the rep from Tulane told her, we want a 1420 or above. Below that, don't send your scores. And she didn't. And they let her in and then they gave her a little bit of money too, because of her rigor and her grades. She sent her test scores to Alabama, got in, and Georgia got in. University of South Carolina got in with real merit aid, which she ended up going there. They gave her a great award for that good score and good grades. So, but again, certain schools, a 1390 will help you here and hurt you there. And that's an interesting thing, understanding what's the middle 50 range for each school, which Ronnie and the team will go through all of that in terms of looking at where, and that's part of what's gotten a little strange is the same score will, again, it's send it to these four, withhold these four. And that's part of the game here. So testing, there's a question of, should my kids still prioritize testing? Does it matter? How much does it matter? And my catchphrase is test optional doesn't mean test irrelevant. There are many things that are optional, but they're still meaningful and impactful in terms of academic rigor, leadership. They're not required, but they make a difference. And so there was a moment in time when schools were so new to test optional that they were very transparent with data. And then they locked it tight. They closed up there was a 2020, 2021, they were sharing. And then they stopped sharing because it doesn't help them to share. It actually hurts them to share. Because what colleges want is they want more kids to apply. And the vast majority of schools who care about how selective they are, and they compete on that. And it's interesting that even like Jeremiah Quinlan, when they went back in 2024, about a year ago, they said like they actually had been admitting kids 3-1 with test scores. And they felt like calling it test optional was disingenuous. They were telling everybody we are agnostic, but then they were admitting 3-1 with test scores. And they finally said, we're pretty much lying. So it's not optional. And then they went back test required, which I think they have more integrity doing that. Boston College, they were test optional, but now their website, they're moving toward transparency. It's test recommended, which means send your scores. And they're admitting kids again with test scores, 30%, without 11%. These are schools that really likes testing. Colgate, it's double the admission rate. Notre Dame, this one Catholics. Emory, double. UVA, but then there are schools like Vandy where it's not double. Schools like Vandy where there is a different approach where they really are test optional. But part of it now, this is a very small list. And since 2023, no one is giving this data on the admit rates with without test scores because they feel that will naturally deflate admission numbers and kids who have low test scores won't apply. Or kids without testing won't apply. or at much lower rates. So they're trying to, if you want to maximize the number of kids who apply, then you want to, you want to encourage everyone to apply. But this is some of the facts that we know is there. Then again, I mentioned there are schools like BC said, for this reason, students who complete their test scores are encouraged to submit. Grinnell, like if you don't submit, the scores may help you. If you don't, we have less information about you. These kind of schools, they're hinting. They're giving you a clue, like it will help, we encourage. That means they typically want to see it, unless there's something really compelling, or there's something, there's some reason. Otherwise, like Boston College, they're showing you, we encourage you, and they're admitting kids to almost 3-to-1. So I listen to them if they have it on their website, we encourage. And Tufts became more transparent last year, actually this year. Generally, over a 13 or 28, we encourage. So if you have a 1150, don't send it, but a 1350, I would send it. So I like, also I like the schools where they say there's a do no harm policy, which to me is fabulous and like is best in class. I will just send it. We'll use it if it helps you. We'll hold it if it doesn't help you. But Tufts is telling you this. And then Auburn is very interesting. Their pivot was pretty wild. They were optional like everybody else. Then they went conditional optional, where under a 3.6, you must submit. Over a 3.6, it's optional. But then starting in a year, they're saying we're going to make it required. But this current year, if you don't apply with test scores, we're going to consider less than 5% of kids without test scores. So they're just telling you like, wow, wow. So they're test optional this year, but that's a little bitty window of kids getting in without test scores. So, and again, this is all, you don't know this until they tell you, but some of these schools, again, it's their official language and what they're doing internally, they don't always match up. And that's interesting. So more kids are sending scores. This number keeps going up this year. I expect more than half of applications will include test scores, just because we're adding Ohio State and Texas. We're getting more and more kids applying with test scores. So the Common App numbers, I think this year we crest past half. And again, there's so many schools that are not very selective out there, but the schools are selective are getting more applications with test scores. And so, that should increase. Here, we have the number of kids who are not first gen. We have over half who are reporting test scores now. And this number has shifted. It's flipped. It used to be withholding with scores was the bigger number, but now it's been creeping back. Eventually, it'll be 60% plus send test scores and 40% withhold. So definitely a change in energy, a change in the dynamic. And testing really matters for certain kids. If you're an engineer, that math score matters. And that's why we're seeing, and if you're STEM, if you have a 550 in math, that doesn't, but even in their kids, I've talked to some admissions officers who are like, hey, the student had an A in calculus, but then they sent, a low math score, or they sent a 1 on the AP calculus. And they're like, whoa, they have to suddenly reframe that A in calculus because now there's new information. They're just really kind of contradicts at some level. This an A connotes mastery, but then a 550 does not connote mastery. So they have some tension there. I wrote an article in August about why engineering students can't count on test optional admissions. And I was going through some of the numbers, and here's some of the top 16 engineering programs and how many have gone back test required. Now it's MIT, Tech, Stanford, Purdue, Carnegie Mellon, Caltech, Austin, Cornell, UPenn, Hopkins. And the UCs aren't going back anytime soon, but Michigan, Illinois, A&M probably will go back. I'm looking at some of those. So, and also like Cooper Union, it's testing is required for School of Engineering applicants. The Naval Academy, all the academies are test required, and a third of the midshipmen are engineers. Worcester Poly is now test optional, not blind. It just seems like for engineering kids, the math really matters. So that's something I'd be mindful of if you're looking at engineering. And schools that are very selective, that's the privates and the public flagships, it seems like testing does matter more. And looking at who's test required, you can see that some of these schools are the most selective schools in the country that are not test required. All right, so that's the background. And we're going to go a little bit deeper now before we go to Q&A in terms of the two assessments. And again, there's been this convergence over time. It started off where they were so different. Now they look a lot more similar than they used to. So structurally, you have a 2-hour and 14-minute SAT. And Ronnie has been in this space long enough to remember the SAT was 5 hours. It was a beast. You had 10 sections and then you had an essay. So from, I think it was, 2000 and I forget when they dropped the essay, but it's 2005 to 2015, thereabouts. It was a long test, 8 o'clock until, around 1 o'clock. And it was a long day, but now it's short. It's 8 to 10:30. And now there's no more Scantron. It's all digital. So it's like all the stuff at home, you pre-enter everything, the pre-auth. So you show up there, enter your code, and pop, you're going versus all the bubbling. Then the ACT said, wait a minute, we're losing here. How do we beat them at the game? Let's go to 2 hours and 5 minutes. They went for 7-minute abs down to 5-minute abs, and but they can get a good answer. And I think there was some extra some fat in the like they used to ask 75 questions for English, and now it's down to like 50. And they're I think that it had over 200 items on the old test. Now there are fewer. So the ACT is shorter, but it's still gonna, I think, give a valid measure looking at some of their data and their analyses. And science is now optional, and we're seeing about a third of our kids aren't taking science. We recommend everyone take it one time in case one of your schools happens to require it. But my sense is over time, science goes away. It's going to go the way of the essay or the SAT subject tests. I think it really is, an appendage from an older time. But there have been some big changes, and we're still using the concordance table that was set up. It's about 6, 7 years old. The NCAA no longer requires testing for the eligibility matrix. They used to be the one, they bring them together to establish, given this GPA, I needed this test score. But now they're optional for NCAA. But these two companies will get together, not next year, but the year after, and release a new concordance table. But until then, the one we have is fine. And it's still directionally correct. It's going to be off by a tiny bit because we've had some changes in both directions, but not by anything that meaningful. I think it's very marginal. Like the delta for the SAT, it's like 11, 12 points. And for the ACT, it's a fraction of a point too. So we're not going to see huge changes once they concord them again, because they tried to really align the new tests with the old test. So there is no concordance of the old to the new. So colleges are simply using the current concordance tables. It's the SAT. So you understand it's digital and adaptive. It's digital on computer, adaptive, which means your first section is going to be a baseline section that is essentially the same for all students. There'll be a little bit of difference in terms of the order of the questions, the answer choices. But then it's a smattering of easy, medium, hard questions. And then if I get 2/3 right, I'm going to a more advanced module. If I get under 2/3 right, I'm going to an easier module. And so that lets them be much more efficient and get rid of items that really aren't relevant to the kids. So a really advanced student is not going to get a bunch of easy items on the adaptive module, nor will a lower level student get the super hard questions. And that's how you can get to fewer items and more efficiency. So adaptive testing is the gold standard. And eventually, the ACT should go there. And the previous CEO, Martin Rorta, he promised that every single assessment we have will be adaptive and digital. So I'm waiting on that to happen. But still, they're going more slowly. But the College Board got there first, and they all should be adaptive because also it's just better for the kids as well. So the ACT is now available in paper and digital format, but it's not adaptive. It's a linear test, doesn't change. Science is optional at the end. So the baseline is just reading, English, and math is simply 2 hours and 5 minutes, short and sweet. And kids like short and sweet. As do the administrators. It's an easier time getting in and out. It's not, and digital is nice because there's no paper to match up, no Scantrons. But we still recommend that kids taking the ACT take paper. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So science is optional. Science is a little less speedy. So it's scored at a 36, but it's not going to be factored into your super score or your composite score. So you're going to say, I got a 27 on the ACT and I got a 30 on science. It doesn't count. It's not going to impact the score. It's just a separate score like the essay. I got a 36, and I got a 10 on the essay. It's not part of that composite score. The ACT is still faster, and that hasn't really changed. In terms of the relative speed, the SAT allows 30% more time per question on math and 36% more time on verbal. So it's a more spacious test. You have more time. We have fewer kids struggling with timing on the SAT than we have on the ACT. Some do, for sure, but the proportion, there are more kids trying to speed, and And that's one of the reasons why if you have a combination for time and a half, it's more valuable on the ACT because it's more of a speed test to this day, and it has been forever. And the number of items. So the SAT does it with 98 items, all the math, all the verbal, and that includes 8 that are experimental. And the ACT can get it done in 131 items. If you take science, that goes to 171. So still, it's because it's adaptive. That's how you get the efficiencies. All right, and then so there are 8 questions in every section. 2 of them don't count. They're pre-test questions for the next future tests. They're trying to make sure items are not biased by gender, by demography, by race, or by class. And they're also making sure that the items are good items, and they also gauge how hard the questions are, so they can build a test that's the right level of difficulty. There are a lot more experimental items on the ACT. There are 29 based on the structure of it, because English, it's all in these big vignettes, so 10 questions a piece, or occasionally it's 5. So there'll be a whole big experimental block of questions on English, also on reading and science. For math, those 4 will be randomly scattered through. But it just means that the number of operational items is really decreasing. Look at reading especially. You're dropping, there were 40 operational items before, now it's under 27, which means a careless error or a missed question can really have a bigger impact. And you miss a couple, and it can drop it pretty deeply, because 9 of those questions don't count. So that's one thing. We like the paper test. We do not like the current format of the Pearson's test nav is, we believe, far inferior to the College Board's Blue Book application. And there's a lot of work to do. And they'll do it. They just haven't done it yet. And so I think paper is the surest bet, and we like it for a lot of reasons. Again, the interface isn't as strong. And we've had kids go in there where they promised us eventually it'll be a bring your own device situation. Like the College Board, everything's bring your own device. And you're testing, you're practicing on the same thing you're going to be doing the real thing on with your MacBook or your Windows laptop, or your tablet, whatever you're using. But a lot of schools haven't made the switch over, and they've promised bring your own device, but they haven't delivered all over the country or internationally. And so sometimes you go into the school and they give you a wonky device, or some of our students went in there and they had it was the wrong screen resolution, like some of the buttons were cut off, next and back, and it was just problems. And so BYOD will come, but it's not yet universal. So eventually this is a good thing for them to manage their technology and make sure they can use it on anyone's device. One of the things I really dislike about TestNav is that you do highlights on one of these passages with 10 questions, and you go to the next question, the highlights disappear. It's transient highlights, which is just bad design. That should not be the case, which the highlights are durable. But again, the SAT, you don't have a 10-question passage. The structure of it now is you have 1 paragraph, 1 question, next, brand new passage. So I think the formatting of the College Board also makes more sense for digital versus these longer form things. And additionally, some of the questions, they'll ask you a question, one main point of the highlighted passage, and you have to actually go and find it. Because you're lower down, you have to go scan, which is really, it should hop to it immediately. It's just, there's some design errors in Pearson. The College Board, it's fresh, it's just better design. They spent the money on the user experience, user interface, and the ACT hasn't, but they're more poor. The College Board has a much bigger war chest, 1.8 billion, like a hedge fund. But the ACT, they were essentially almost bankrupt, and they sold to a Nexus Capital Group out in LA, private equity. So there's been a whole different thing. But I think the College Boards, their excellent funding is showing in their design. Also, the calculator, the Blue Book, College Board did a deal with Desmos, and Desmos is the most popular used calculator in all of the US for high school kids. They use it for sciences, for physics, for chemistry. It's the best in class graphic calculator. And so now they're using a scaled down version of Desmos on the SAT. You don't have that same quality on the ACT. It's a much inferior calculator. So I like the calculator a lot better also on the Blue Book app. Eventually, ACT might do a deal with Desmos. And also a note that students who are taking the SAT need to practice on Desmos. because you can solve so many problems using the calculator if you actually put the time in and learn. It's a really powerful tool for all of our kids. One thing in terms of timing, so they gave kids more time on the reading and the science without really changing the level of difficulty. So you see that for English and for math, the blue is this is a year old data, but when they were doing the blue is math, English, reading, and science, and then the orange is just math, English, and reading, no science. And the whole thing is how many kids finished. And so the math, um, and also the old format and the new format. So English, more kids aren't finishing. Math, more kids aren't finishing. More kids are finishing the reading, and more kids are finishing the science quite measurably. There's a nice pop on that. So science and reading are a little bit less speedy, and more kids are finishing, but still kids are struggling, especially with the math section to finish. You can see the numbers there. Okay, so the ACT still is a speedier test, and that's something that you should always give a kid a practice SAT and a practice ACT on the front end before you commit to any one test. Because some kids will struggle with the timing, some kids are fine with the timing. And also there are differences like the level of reading on the SAT is 2 grade levels higher. So you have more advanced reading, but you have more time. There are differences. And so it's important that kids do a practice test before they choose a test. And the ACT science, I really believe it's going to go away. It's not really a science test. If you want science, you do AP Chem or physics or bio, and does Paideia, it's been a long time. In terms of the IBs, or
No,
is it APs?
just APs and math and science.
Got it, perfect. Math and science APs. And there are some schools who've abandoned APs entirely, and with the kind of teachers you have at Paideia, and they always evaluate you based on your class and your cohort, not compared to other schools. It's if you only offer 6 APs, and then maxing out is taking 5, or versus other schools. I was talking with one of my buddies whose kid is over at Grady, and looking at and they have a ton of APs. And again, should I take 5 as a junior? I'm like 5, or 5 as a senior. It's like that's going to be tough, but it's like no, like don't take 4. And there are certain schools where there are different cultures, but it's all about what the school you're in and what's offered at your school. But again, the science section is not like AP Chem or bio or physics at all. It's mostly, can I read the passage? Can I interpolate? Can I look at a graph and look, or, it's very basic stuff. There are about 7 or 8 questions that are demanding some outside knowledge in terms of like scientific experiments, like design, like what's a dependent variable, independent variable, some basic scientific language, but not do I really know chemistry or physics or bio. So very different. And here's the really kicker, why a lot of schools are going to drop science. It's this data here. So looking at the composite scores, look at the 4-year college enrolled at the bottom. The average score with English, math, and reading, 22.7 kids who are enrolled in 4-year schools. If you throw in science, it goes 22.8. It's a 1/10 of a point. Is it worth all the energy, all the effort? And for the vast, vast majority of kids, your science score correlates very highly with your reading and your math scores. There are some kids where it doesn't. There were outliers. I've seen it where a kid does really poorly on science, but on average, over the course of this is 590,000 kids, it's almost no difference. And so I think schools will look at this, they'll do their own data and say, yeah, you know what? We don't really need the science section. Doesn't affect the super score in a meaningful way, doesn't affect the composite score. Therefore, what's the point? BU, they're weird. They said they're test optional. If you're going to send your test scores for these, then you must send a science section. But they're really one of the few in the country. We see here, there are some schools who said we don't require it. Harvard, Stanford, we have some great schools in the country, Georgia. But then most schools are just not on record. They just don't have anything on anywhere. And so the assumption is that, if there's nothing posted, then it's optional. That's like a default. And, your composite scores now are not going to include science. And hundreds of schools haven't given us any policy. They're just treating it like science is optional. There are a couple of recommendations, like Georgetown, Pomona, and BU, they want it. Duke recommends it, Michigan State. The Florida Publics dropped it. It's optional. But we still believe, take it one time, spend a few dollars more, $5, in case a school requires it, like a BU or Pomona, somewhat, that could happen. And then again, science is not part of your composite. It's still, when they generate the composite scores, it looks like this. 34 composite, one of our students, math 32, science 30, English 36, reading. But the science is not being factored into the composite. So it's showing it like it's one of the other scores, but it's not. It should be separated out. It should be in different color. That's, again, just bad design. They have bad designers with ACT. But it doesn't touch your composite score. Even if it appears it does, it's not. Because if that 30 was factoring, the composite would go to a 33. So it's not part of the composite. All right. And there are some, if you did not take any of the new enhanced, it's called the enhanced ACT. It's garbage. It's a legacy and enhanced. That's their language. Then your super score would include, but there probably aren't many of you on this. That's going to be seniors mostly. So if you're on this webinar, you're probably a junior or below. So most everyone will take one of these tests post from September going forward, which means your composite score will exclude science. It'll be a separate score. And then Vandy has a do no harm. Science will be included if it helps. Otherwise, it's only if it raises your super score. Okay, so I like that. I like do no harm policies. And then super scoring from the old and the new. Some of your kids may have taken an old test, the legacy. The ones who will not super score, I don't know why they're not. Harvard, UT, Brigham, Michigan, Chapman, Colorado College, University of Rutgers. But then those who are this group, again, Stanford, Tech, Cal, Auburn, good schools. But then you have 2,000 schools not in the record. And the assumption is they're all going to super score, and why not? If they do super score. So some schools doing weird things, and it's all going to wash out. In about a year, there is no more enhanced legacy, it's just the ACT. But for this year of transition, and especially the kids who are applying to school now for early or now for regular for January 1st, they have some of this to deal with, but you guys probably won't. All right, a few more comparisons. 747. I should probably, let me go through. I want time for Q&A for sure. A lot of overlap. The SAT, 11th grade reading level, ACT, 9th grade reading level. So more advanced texts always on ACT. There's some really tough reading. They'll have a Shakespearean sonnet. There'll be a thing by John Donne. There'll be, Edith Wharton. They have harder texts by design. There is a more advanced math and a science section on the ACT. That's by design. There is more algebra and advanced math on the SAT. There's twice as much trig and geometry on the ACT, and they both have some data analysis. But the SAT essentially is algebra 1, algebra 2, a lot of functions, a lot of graphing, and much less. It's like deeper, whereas the ACT is broader and narrower in terms of how we just finished our book for the ACT. And there's so much math. It's like a 1,200-page book. It's a total beast. But it's just because there's so much math content covered on the ACT for those really high-scoring kids. All right. And then again, some like matrix multiplication, domains and ranges of functions. This only appears on the ACT. Some of this pre-cal stuff, never, ever on the SAT. These things would never appear on the SAT. And again, Desmos calculator is a big deal. Anyone taking the SAT, practice Desmos. You can go to desmos.com, learn the calculator. It's very important. Again, you can always take things and plug it. You can graph them and then find the answer, or versus doing the algebra. Very helpful. And then the SAT, you have short. Everything's a tiny paragraph, one question, the next topic, which feels more like like TikTok. Everything's like bam, bam. There's no long form anything. It's all one question, one passage, one paragraph, next. And it goes in the structure of, it starts off with using reading comprehension, and then you're shifting to a little bit of grammar, mechanics, conventions, and then transitions. And so they really, when they smash together English and reading, I hear my son again. Okay, you want to see Theo again? Theo, what is happening? Mom, my mother is not being the best babysitter. Say hi, everybody. Hi. All right, we have 10 minutes left. All right. All right, guys, I will see you, Mom, in 10 minutes. Okay, bye, Theo. Thanks for coming. See you in a minute. All right. So where were we? And the adaptive modules, just really quick and easy. The baseline module looks like this. You have a couple really easy questions, 3 really hard questions. It's the middle. You're testing the middle. Question 2s and 3s. If I miss more than a third, it looks like this. A lot more level 1 and 2 questions. I'm going easy. If I go to the hard module, it looks like this. So it really is the very, very different experiences. So timing, one thing is make sure kids who are going to go into the harder modules, kids who are scoring in the upper 660s and above, they have to really pivot on timing because you're given the same amount of minutes per question for the baseline and the hard, but it's a very different experience. You got to really pace yourself quickly. And that's why practice really matters. Scoring is very different. For about 90 some years, everything was basic. Everything counted the same. One point, one raw point to one scale point. There was no different weighting of different items. But now, different items, like there are like 5 different weights. And so this question counts a lot more, and this question counts a lot less. And because of that, they're not giving us back a robust score report. It's a lot more. Now they give us back these heat maps. They don't tell you did I miss number 13? Did I miss number 18? You'll never know. They don't even tell you did I go to the hard module or not. The only way you know is if you get more than a 660 on a section, you went to the hard module. But it could be I got a 550. I could have gone to the easy module and done decently, or gone to the hard module and done not as well. They don't even, so you never even know. But there are ways but I wouldn't worry about that as much. But again, you lose data. One of the reasons that the practice tests from companies like Applerouth are really valuable because we give much better feedback than this. This is for a test prep person. This is not helpful to me. I don't know what you missed. What the timing issues, you can't even tell. All right, so we have good practice. We have 4 tests. How you prepare? There are 7 good practice tests now in the Blue Book. Very useful. Practiced on Desmos, very helpful. Make sure you take a practice test of both. And then if you score within 70 points on the SAT scale, you're in the margin of error. So because there's 30 points of error on each test, the SAT and ACT. So if I get a 1220 SAT and a 27 ACT, there's no difference. On a given day, those could flip. If I get a 1200 SAT and a 29 ACT, I take it 5 times in a row, I'll probably always do better on the ACT. So in that case, go with your stronger score. But a lot of kids, about half of kids, are in the range of indifference where they just choose which one do you like better. Ideally, plan on taking the test 3 times officially. Some kids are 1 and done. I love that. Some are 2 and done. But we see, I've analyzed thousands and thousands of students' test results. On average, by the 3rd test, kids hit their max. There's some testing effects, some confidence effects, and also there's super scoring, where schools will take, if I do 20 points better on March in math, 20 points better in June in verbal, bam, bam, my score just popped up. And so super scoring really helps, taking it more than once. Things that matter, practice tests matter, spreading it out. It's better to do it over 6 weeks than over like a weekend. Starting early, time on task. When you put in more time, you do better. Having a goal and having some momentum towards the end. If you're taking a test like next month, within a previous month, take a full-time practice test to make sure you're in that timed mentality. Really important. Testing plans are simple. They added, which I really like, the first ever September SAT. Now you have 5 in a row. It used to be there was this big gap between the June SAT and then the October test. There was a huge gap, but now there's a June SAT. There's August that happened about 2013. Then there's a September that happened this year. So it's like now there's a nice full calendar, and there are 5 months in a row for the SAT from August to December. But make sure you knock it out, by October or even September for those early deadlines to make sure you hit. If you're, looking at some of them are mid-October, and that they all have their drop dead testing date where they won't look at beyond that for early admission or early decision. So, but now there's so many options in summer testing, which is really great for kids. A lot of our high flyers prep in the summer when they don't have the same academic demands and so forth. And there are different structures, different ways to do it. But make sure, and some kids like do a summer prep and then they wait and which is fine. They might do a class, anchor in one test and come back later, totally fine, as long as you refresh it a little bit. Make sure you don't go in cold after 4 or 5 months, because you will forget some of the content naturally. But now there's I've had big athletes go and do the summer option and do a June, August, September test, totally fine. But if they're like varsity athletes or they're super academically oriented, tons of APs, that's a great plan too. So there are lots of options now for kids. Super scoring, again, I mentioned they just grab your best score and they add them for the composite. It's very, very common. ACT automatically generates your super score now. And science, I told you, is stripped out. But you can submit directly if you want to include it. Then there's the big question at the end here. Should I send my test scores? We'll get your baseline first. Find out, is my baseline even close? If I get a 21 out of the gate on ACT, and I'm looking at schools that want between a 32 and 34, that's a big lift. And so you may be better off, you probably are better off focusing on other aspects. If I get a 26, 27 on the ACT out of the gate and my school is 1 of 32, okay, that's going to be more in the range. Can you get 5 points? That's our average gain, kids who are doing private tutoring. It's like you can get there. But if I need 10 points, that's a big lift. And for some kids, I would say just write a hell of an essay, do more recs, whatever else. But I think testing may not be the path for you. And there are many, many, many schools which are optional. Rick, a good buddy, often I gave a talk with him. I was on his podcast in September. It was really fun. Him and his co-author. He has a great book about college admissions. And his thing is, if you're in the top half, send it. If you're in the bottom quarter, I probably wouldn't send it. Go with your strengths. That was Rick. It's the bottom quarter, like for the Buffs, they have an 1170. So half of their class, and again, enrolled class, common data set, is between an 1170 and a 1380, which means a quarter of the kids over 1380, a quarter of the kids below 1160. Then there's that middle range. So anything over the halfway part, for sure you sent it. It's not going to hurt you. If I have an 1120, probably I'm not going to send it. It's not going to help me. So go. But that 1260, there's some nuance in there. If I have like a 700 math and a 550 verbal, but I'm applying to a STEM program, that 700 might help me. If I have really amazing grades and only middling test scores, I might withhold it. If I have average grades, but then, so there are different factors at play here based on the major, and Paideia has amazing counseling, and they can help you with these kind of questions. Everyone there is super sharp and knows their stuff. So that was almost all of it. Let's do the quick poll right now before you hop, and then we have time for questions. And I know there's some questions and answers. This is a really fast couple questions. Essentially is, do you want any more support guidance? We can reach out if you want anything. Happy to help. Things that we do. So I am going to open up the Q&A. I think, don't forget the poll. Yes, thank you. All right, now let me open up my question and answer. And let's go ahead and everyone type in your questions into the Q&A window. And we will jump in there.
And Jed, while you're waiting for the Q&A to start, while you were talking, I just looked up some stats on this year's senior class. There are 113 kids who are seniors. 112 of those kids took some sort of testing, so we only had one student that did not test.
Wow.
101 of those took the SAT, 22 took the ACT, which means 11 took both. But the SAT was by far the more popular.
5 to 1.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
We across the country, we're about 3 to 1. Like we definitely, or not exactly, but it's like there's SAT is dominant right now, but I do think this no shorter test with a little bit more time per question will pull kids back in. Is there a limit on number of times? No. Is there a penalty? No, there's not. But again, you hit a point of diminishing returns, and even a point of like negative return after 3, maybe 4. That's it. Because part of it you have practice tests, and that's how you build the reps. You don't do your reps for the official test. It's practice tests. But I think 3 times for almost all kids is the charm, unless there's something really going on with anxiety or some kind of medication thing or something happened. But typically the 3rd time is all you need if you're doing practice testing. All right, other questions? What else haven't I answered? I'll do a stop share. Okay, so what do we got? Unless I answered every single question you've ever had. Here we go. Oh, geez. Can you send me information on testing? Sure. Oh, wow. The email didn't lock in. All right. I can probably take a picture of that. Normally I might get some help with that one. Okay. Can you re-explain the part about what scores in ACT versus ST would make you choose one or the other? So, well, there is if you type in SAT, ACT concordance, the word concordance, there'll be a table, and it'll show you just if you get a 27, that concords with this, and there's a range. But ultimately, my reference point is, if you're looking at your 2 scores and you're more than 60 points higher on the scale of the SAT, you're better on that test. And we could do it like 5 times in a row, and you're gonna be better every time, because there's definitely some room for error. So type in the concordance table for testing, and that'll pull right up. SAT concordance table, you'll Google it and be there in in one click. All right. Um, Next up, the scores expire like after 3 years. Well, yeah, they like eighth grade testing for tip. Like for the, there definitely some kids took it in seventh grade, and you want to take it again when you're a junior. And so, yeah, I think 3 years is a decent expiry. It's not official, but you're going to typically do better unless you got a perfect score when you were in seventh grade, and then you're amazing. But yeah, there because the level of reading on the ST is 11th grade. The math, some kids are doing that math in ninth, 10th grade. But definitely the verbal is pretty advanced for the College Board. How accurate is the PSAT as a predictor of the ST? Perfect. It is. They line up exactly. The only exception is at the very, very high end, the PSAT scale caps out at 1520. So there's 80 points that's missing, 40 points per section that's missing. Like they withhold like the most advanced, like there's no trig on the PSAT, and the most advanced science reading they withhold. Otherwise, though, if I get a 1340 on the PSAT, it's the same structure, it's the same timing, it's the same test essentially. Just the scale is a little bit different, but it only deviates at the top of the scale for the kids getting a 1520 or above. So if I get a 1360, let's say, on the PSAT, I go in there the next day into the ST, I'll get within like 30 points typically. So that's, but there is some, if I get a 1510 on the PSAT, I might go in there and get a 1550 because again, there's 80 points that's not available to you just by the scaling. But it's linearly lined up, and that's by design. So yeah, there's no conversion table at all. All right, is the College Board stricter on granting extra time than the ST? No, they're not. What factors, and some would say the opposite, but ultimately there have been a lot of lawsuits with Disabilities Act. Now Department of Ed's kind of been gutted, so I don't know in terms of their legal team in terms of who's going to hear these things. But after losing several lawsuits and having the Biden administration jumped on board, and there were big awards when people were not granting accommodations, and they were making it harder, making an undue burden on people with disabilities. The ACT, the College Board, like, okay, if you have a disability, the school grants it, honors it, you're good. It used to be very different. But after some of these lawsuits where the testing agencies lost, like the GMAC and like the GRE, everyone's gotten much more liberal with the LSAT. And so if you have a disability, it's diagnosed, here it is, it's the code. And in the school, they're the ones who are putting through the application. So the PIDEA Disabilities Office will coordinate with the SSD coordinator at the College Board, and they submit on your behalf. And they're going to gather the paperwork, if you have an IEP or 504, if you have a psych eval, they're going to put it together and send the package off. But they really do grant it if the school honors it. If you get time and a half on testing at PIDEA, they're probably going to give it to you. It's very, very common.
And Jed, for all the people in the room, if you're in the middle of that process or beginning that process, just talk to the Learning Center and they can assist you in navigating the accommodation request.
Yep. And they're pros, and they're going to manage that for you. It used to be very different, but now it's not. But yeah, I remember years ago, I have an article I wrote in 2006. It's one of my Google has ranked it pretty highly. If you type in accommodations, SAT, I'm on one of the top. I'll probably take the first page. But it was about you have to submit and resubmit. And they're going to turn you down. The first time you'll be turned down naturally. And because they used to have little asterisks that it was taken with conditions that were unusual, they got rid of that because of a lawsuit. And then people flooded the zone. Everyone applied for accommodations. And then they're going to turn you down the first time. Now it isn't like that. And they really are just working with the schools and working, kids who are homeschooled, a little bit different. But that's, it really isn't a problem as much anymore. I used to have to deal with so many parents who were fighting for a year and a half to get the combinations. Isn't a thing anymore. And having to reapply with new evidence or new information, or there's a whole thing. One difference though is you're applying for a certain test date for the ACT, but you're applying broadly for the College Board. So if they give you a combination for time and a half, that'll be for your APs and your SATs. You apply one time to get that disabilities number in that accommodation, versus you want to target it early for the ACT. Okay. Are there any other questions, y'all, about testing? It's 8:04. And if not, and again, I'll do this again. if the questions emerge, I about once a month we talk about testing, and hopefully I'll be here next year with Ronnie again. And so if new questions emerge, I'll be back. If you have kids who are only sophomores or freshmen,
Jed, I
um,
suspect you talk about testing each and every day.
I probably, yeah, not unusual. It's a recorded, yes. So we're going to send you a link, and then also there are folks who signed up who couldn't be here tonight. We'll get them a link too. But feel free to watch it, share it, and if you have any follow-up questions, just info@Applerouth. Happy to take any questions. And my pleasure. Thanks for coming out, y'all. And look forward to the next time. So,
Thank
well,
you,
Ronnie,
Jed.
thank you for the opportunity, man. Appreciate
It's
it.
always a pleasure. Thank you for your help.
Anytime. All right, guys. Have a good night.